One thing that I get asked a lot is how to distribute correctly my render layers over the render passes. How do we output separately what we need from the background, from the main character, and any other foreground element? So let's just do that. Right now, as you can see here, all of our elements are visible, and what we want to do is to separate them through layers, visible layers and invisible layers, so that they get organized in order for us to render out separate elements. So the first thing we need to understand is that all of these visible icons to the right are going to let us see things in the viewport and in the render. And every checkbox that we have on the left side is going to allow us to be overwritten if they are placed in their own layer. How do we create new render layers? Okay, so let's go through that. I'm going to switch everything off, as you can see right here, and then I'm going to create a bird layer and a cupid layer, and these elements I need to be active, and when I switch to cupid, only cupid checkbox is activated, and that is helpful so that we can separate everything. I'm going to create a brand new rendered layer, and this is going to be named background, and as such I'm going to switch off everything else, and now I can see that I have my cupid layer active, my background layer active with its own sky, and therefore you can see in the rendered layers that you have the option to select which rendered layer you want to render out at that specific time. So when you press F12 to render, all of these elements are going to be rendered out in each render layer nodes here in the compositor. So I'm going to switch this to birds, and then I'm going to select one viewer. Of course, we want to see what we have in the viewer, and I can see and read all of my layer, my separate layer renders in these rendered layer nodes. Okay, I am in the compositor, as you can see. And now I am going to connect this. I'm going to have backdrop active. That way I can move this so that I do not waste more UI space. I can do my composite directly in here. Okay, but I want to Shift D, duplicate these rendered layers, and then switch to Cupid, and then I am always going to see just Cupid in my composition. I'm going to Shift D again, because right now I want to have my background or my sky layer isolated from all of the other ones. And then I want to say to Blender, please render these three elements separated from each other. So how do we do that? We need to create a node, which is a write node. Okay, have your node wrangler active. By the way, it's a very important add-on that comes with Blender natively. So I'm going to Shift A, file output, and then I'm going to plug my Cupid render path in there. I'm going to open properties. I'm going to target my base path, which is the place where it's going to be written once it's rendered out. My entire sequence is going to be rendered out here. So let me just correct this. This is going to target the subfolder Cupid, which doesn't exist, but it will exist once we hit F12 to render. And from there, I'm going to name my layer Cupid. So this way, if I am using Nuke or After Effects, my layer, my EXR layer will be correctly named. It depends on what you're going to write here on the properties. Okay, so I'm going to label this Cupid layer. I'm going to assign a yellow color because I don't know, his golden hair kind of hints us for yellow color. Again, here I'm going to rename this. Since I Shift D duplicated this one, I'm going to rename this one to background, set it to blue color, so I have a different layer there. Shift D once again, I'm going to connect this to the input of the node, and then I'm going to switch colors. I'm going to switch this layer name, and then I'm going to change the file subpath, and of course I'm going to select my format here, change the folder where it's going to be written, and of course the layer name. And basically that's all you need to do. This is going to be renamed birds as such, Make sure everything is named correctly, targeting directly the directories that you want to write this to. So let's again check this. Everything is in place. It doesn't matter whatever layer you have active at the moment. What Blender is going to do is going to render out the result, and then it's going to write it to an external file on the format that you chose. So I'm going to save this now. I'm going to press F12 in just a second. So let me just see that everything is in place. The camera will always be present, of course, always active. Otherwise, you will not get your render. And then finally, hit F12 or just go to render, render animation. And as you can see, it's going to render the first pass, which is the birds. Awesome. Then it's going to take its time, and the second pass is going to be Cupid, which is out of focus. And the third pass is going to be just the background with nothing else. And it's taking its time, but it's going to write it. And this is very useful to make your scenes run faster and of course separate your elements.